Chapter 2. His partner was nowhere to be seen, but Dyani was still there, lingering in the corner of the street, one foot kicked up on the wall she leaned against, her arms crossed. Wulf sighed. He hoped Julian had been too angry to notice her. "What do you want?" he asked in a low voice, slowing down enough for her to walk alongside him. "I told everyone that curfew started early." "I've got time," she said. "It will take a few minutes to get the news to Captain Royce, and longer still to enforce it across the city. As long as I don't run into Julian, I can plead ignorance of the early start and no one will be the wiser." They walked for a minute in silence. Wulf kicked a loose stone across the cobbled street, watching it skitter into the dry, dusty gutter. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Dyani hitch her bag closer to her hip, her hand closing protectively over the top flap. "So was I right?" he asked in a low voice. Dyani glanced up at him. Her violet blue eyes narrowed. Hesitantly, she nodded. Wulf sighed. "That's a dangerous game, Dy." "So's the one you're playing," Dyani replied. He wanted to protest, but the ache in his hip and back said that she was right. She was always right. Wulf sighed and rubbed his head, then winced as his fingers brushed a raised lump. It radiated a dull ache that spread forward to his temples. They passed a small knot of workmen gathered around a half-built stone wall, holding pottery cups of water and talking amongst themselves. Wulf paused and told them that curfew was early tonight, that they needed to pack up their work and go home. They nodded, seemingly docile enough, though Wulf caught a few of them looking at Dyani, a couple showing wrinkled brows of concern, but not a few with scowls and muttered insults under their breath. The workmen dispersed, and Dyani and Wulf resumed their walk. "Will you be in danger?" he asked. "From being seen with me?" She pursed her lips, concentrating on weaving the tassels of her belt between her fingers. They'd both heard the same stories. Anyone who willingly associated with the guardsman was suspect in the townsfolk's eyes. "I don't think so," Dyani said eventually. "Granny's status as the apothecary keeps most people on their best behavior. She's outright threatened not to serve anyone who displeases her." She took a little sidestep, enough to nudge his arm with her shoulder. "Including anyone who talks bad about you." Wulf allowed himself a small smile. He didn't deserve Ari's protection, and he doubted she would give it if she knew half of what he'd done while serving the king. But the thought was nice. "Anyway, we're close enough to home that I can make it by myself. Granny says to invite you to dinner tonight." Dyani put her hand on his arm. Wulf patted her hand, feeling the sword calluses on his palm scrape against the working calluses on her knuckles. "Let me go clean up at the barracks first. It's easier for everyone to pretend if I don't enter your house in my guardsman's uniform, and that makes you and Ari safer." Dyani nodded and turned down the street. Wulf stood and watched until she turned a corner and was gone from sight, before he walked onward. Thankfully, the area of the northern quarter where Ari and Dyani lived wasn't in the slums, otherwise he would have walked her to her door. The cottages around them had small front and back gardens, some of them, like Ari's, big enough for a few chickens. Dinner tonight. That would be nice. He was tired of the slop from the barrack kitchens, anyway. Filling and nutritious it might be, but he was convinced the cooks had never heard the words salt and pepper in their lives. And it would give him a chance to privately speak to Dyani about her insurrectionist activities. He slipped his hands into his pockets and found the wad of parchment. Dangerous games they might both be playing, but at least if the captain found he was slacking on his orders, the worst he could get was 20 lashes and maybe being thrown out of the city guard. Dyani's games would lead to her death, unless he could convince her to put them aside for her own safety. The street soon widened from the meandering lane of the north quarter to the wide main thoroughfare of the town, sloping upward to the hill where the castle sat, tall and glittering, over the houses' roofs. The white stone caught the light of the late afternoon sun. Despite the grandeur, Wulf felt a chill wash over his spine. Somewhere up there, the king sat in plush surroundings of velvet and silk, eating the finest the kingdom could offer, while most of the city had to scrounge the alleys for summer greens to feed their families. They weren't even allowed to go forage outside of the city walls. He wasn't sure how much longer it would be before everything boiled over. Wulf stepped to the side as a squad of 5 guardsmen marched past, all wearing a herald tabard over their armor. So Julian had gone back to Captain Royce and reported the decision to institute an earlier curfew, and, likely, everything else that had occurred in the marketplace. Wulf sighed as he began climbing the hill. It was a short climb to the barracks, a low-slung, wide building that stretched on either side of a portcullis that blocked the road to the castle. As Wulf walked up to the gate, he could see that Captain Royce was speaking with the gate guards. His steps slowed, though he tried not to show his worry in any other way. "Wulf?" Captain Royce looked up, his dark eyes locking on Wulf. He nodded to the gate guard, then stepped into the road, blocking Wulf's progress into the barracks. Wulf's stomach nodded. "Sir?" "Julian told me what happened in the market square today." Wulf licked his lips. "If I might ask, sir, what exactly did he tell you?" Royce's eyes fell on Wulf's helmet, still tucked under his arm. Wulf silently cursed himself. He should have at least remembered to put the helmet on as he approached the barracks. "He told me that you prevented him from punishing some rebels after you found propaganda nailed up in the square." Royce held his hand out. "Let's see it." Wulf silently took the ball of parchment out of his pocket and handed it over. Royce took a few slow minutes smoothing the parchment out and looking it over, even taking the time to glance at the back of the parchment, as if that could tell him anything. Finally, he looked back up at Wulf. "Well?" "Sir, with all due respect to my partner, there was no evidence of anyone in that crowd being responsible for this." Wulf gestured to the parchment. "It could have been there the entire day, as far as we knew. Julian was threatening to drag someone random out of the crowd." He held his captain's eyes, desperately hoping the man would believe him, if he betrayed even a hint of his suspicion about Dyani. Royce folded the parchment with a sigh. "Posters like this have been appearing all over the city for the last 2 days." He shouldn't have, but Wulf felt a flare of relief. Too many for only Dyani to be involved. She would be protected by numbers then, if they were looking for more than one culprit. Royce tucked the parchment into his pocket. "You're on duty in the castle tonight." Wulf stared at him, feeling as if a rug had been jerked from under his feet. "Sir, I just finished a shift." "Did I ask for your feedback, soldier?" Royce's voice was harsh with warning. Wulf straightened his back and lifted his chin. "No, sir. My apologies, sir." Royce stepped forward and put his hand on Wulf's shoulder, lowering his voice. "You're a good man, Wulf. Just keep in mind your loyalties." Wulf bit the inside of his lip, confining himself to a nod. Royce dismissed him with a jerk of his head. Wulf went inside the barracks, skirting the edge of the parade ground and slipping into the bathhouse. There, artificial springs had been built for the soldiers' use. One was kept cold, and the other warmed by wood-burning furnaces built under the clay pool. It was deserted at this time of day, with most of the guardsmen still on duty or sleeping. Wulf retrieved a set of non-uniform clothing from his shelf of belongings, undressed, and slipped into the hot springs. As he'd suspected, a truly spectacular bruise had grown on his hip, and, judging by the way the muscles on his back ached as he lowered himself into the springs, he had bruises forming there as well. He had plenty of time before Ari would serve dinner, so Wulf stretched his arms out along the cold tile lip of the pool, allowed his bruised body to float as he leaned back and closed his eyes. The water, liberally laced with sea salt and other minerals every morning when the pool was refilled, worked its magic. The stinging and the scrapes on his back and hands subsided, and his muscles relaxed, allowing him to float in blissful peace. Outside, he could faintly hear the clack and thud of swords on the chipped wooden practice dummies in the corner of the parade grounds. He thought of the night ahead and groaned under his breath. Night duty in the castle was a loathed, miserable job. There was a strict rotation schedule, with guards being forbidden certain rooms and parts of the castle at certain times of the night. They weren't allowed to deviate from that schedule, not to eat or drink or even relieve themselves. Wulf had been told that the king liked to wander the castle at night, and the guards were precisely placed in order to both keep him safe and provide him privacy. He had the entire country docile, Wulf thought sleepily. There was absolutely no reason to keep anything secret. The king could do what he wanted, and no one could stop him. It had been tried. There had been assassination attempts. One confirmed, at least, and 2 others that had been suspected, though no one knew where the guards involved were. With the first attempt, Royce had told them that the guards had fled the city, but if Wulf were to guess, their bodies were currently festering at the bottom of the moat. Just another reason the night shift was so despised and usually reserved as a punishment shift. Despite this, Wulf considered it could have been worse. He sat up a little, reaching back to rub his right shoulder, feeling the thick scar left behind by the one time he'd been whipped. He'd deserved that one. It had been foolish to question Captain Royce's orders about the west quarter burning, especially in front of his fellow guardsmen. That scar should have been a reminder to be more cautious, but if even Julian was noticing Wulf's reluctance to follow orders. Wulf sighed. He'd have to be careful. If he wanted to be any help to the townsfolk, he had to avoid notice. The good thing about being assigned night duty was that it should get Julian off his back for a little while. He got out of the spring, dried off, and dressed in gray linen pants and a slightly rumpled blue shirt, throwing a vest and his belt and hunting knife over the shirt. Guards were forbidden to wear swords when they were out of uniform, but Wulf had no desire to be unarmed. He stowed his gear and left, the dust of the parade ground instantly clinging to his sandals and pants as he crossed it. Thankfully, the guard had changed while he'd been bathing, and so no one was around who had seen the captain give him extra duty. Wulf hoped that meant no one would question why he wasn't taking a nap in preparation for the night. At least it wasn't unusual for guards to leave the barracks in the evening for palatable beer and female companionship.